This is going to be for all the cholim of Klal Yisrael, and also for peace and safety for people in the north and all parts of Israel.
Amen.
Okay, so we're going to have to split this one into two. This is quite a long one. It's about the 4 kinds of premises or areas. Okay, so the first one is Reshut HaYachid, which means enclosed area. This area measures at least 4 by 4 tefachim, handbreadths, which has a means of enclosure measuring at least 10 handbreadths in height. So it's 4 by 4 in width and 10 in height. For example, a house, a fenced garden, a walled settlement whose gates are closed at night, and a large barrel. Okay, open area. It's called Reshut HaRabim. This is a public area, so this we're very familiar with by Bava Kamma in terms of damages. This is an area which is traversed by 600,000 people in the course of one day. There is a view that holds that a public area is any thoroughfare measuring at least 16 cubits, 25 feet in width. So that would be like the M1 South, or where you have traffic all day and just a major thoroughfare, major highway. Okay, the next one is called the Carmelit. Any other open area which is unfenced. It is treated in the same manner as a public area, except that it can be transformed into an enclosed area with suitable partitions. Okay, it's an unfenced area. Okay, so it's like sort of no man's land, I think, if that makes any sense. And you can transform it into a Reshut HaRabim. Okay, for example of a Kamma, this is a field, a road less than 16 cubits wide, an unfenced garden, or a garden with a fence which is lower than 1 meter in height. If a large area of land measuring a base sasayim, 5,000 square cubits, is properly fenced but does not contain residence, for example, a fenced park, it is called a karpef, and it is treated similar to an open area. Then we got a makom patur, which is called a neutral area. This is a structure standing in an open area which measures less than 4 by 4 handbreadths and is more than 3 handbreadths in height. For example, a trash can or drinking fountain, if they conform to the above dimensions. Okay, there's just actually, we can finish it. There are 4 prohibitions. Transferring an article from an enclosed area, private area, to an open area, or vice versa. Transferring an article along a distance of 4 cubits within an open area. Transferring one type of an open area into another, between a public area and a commonwealth. And transferring from one enclosed area to another enclosed area, which is obviously going from enclosed to the public to another enclosed, which that's what they mean. And the last thing is one may transfer an article to or from a neutral area, but one may not transfer through it to other areas. So the main issue is you can't use a public area. That's the main one which concerns us in the modern era.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Kev. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Just give me a sec. We're starting a Mishnah. And this Mishnah actually starts in 48b4, and it begins on 49a1. Okay, I wanted to know, Kevin, since you've read so well, would you like to carry on reading?
Sure. Okay. The Mishnah discusses the law stated in Exodus chapter 21, verse 22, that if a man strikes a pregnant woman and she miscarries, he must pay her husband the value of the lost offspring. If an ox intended to gore its fellow ox and struck a pregnant woman instead, and her offspring were miscarried, the ox's owner is exempt from paying the value of the offspring. But if a person intended to strike his fellow, and instead he struck a pregnant woman and her offspring were miscarried, he must pay her husband the value of the offspring. Mishnah explains how this payment is assessed. How does one pay the value of the offspring? They assess the woman and determine how much she was worth before giving birth, and how much she is worth after giving birth. That is, miscarrying, and the depreciation is considered the value of the offspring which the damager pays. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, if so, a woman increases in value after she gives birth. Rather, they assess the offspring and determine how much they were worth. The Mishnah discusses to whom payment is made. And the damager gives the value of the offspring to the woman's husband. If she has no husband, for he has died, the damager gives it to the husband's heirs. If she was a Canaanite maidservant who had been emancipated and had married an emancipated Canaanite slave, or she was a convert to Judaism, or who had married a male convert, and in either case the husband died without leaving any heirs, the damager is exempt from paying the value of the offspring.
Okay, excellent. Well read. Kev. Thank you very much. Just as a matter of interest, I wanted to just give you a little bit of an insight of the different aspects of what we're dealing with here in the daf. You must, guys, personally, I wanted to thank you for, participating on Saturday night with Rabbi Cohen. I really do, because he was excited that you guys reached this milestone. He's very proud of you guys. You must know that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. So let's just discuss some of the issues in this Gemara. I want to share my screen, and this will help. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to zoom into a certain area in terms of what we're dealing with here. Okay. So, as Kevin read, we're just focusing on what area, the verse in Shmot, chapter 21, verse 22, that if a man strikes a pregnant woman and she miscarries, he must pay her husband for the value of the offspring. Okay? So, if you read that verse, there's an inference that can be drawn from there. What's the inference? Is the Mishnah implies that the reason the ox's owner is exempt from paying the value of the offspring is that the ox intended to gore its fellow ox. But if it intended to gore the woman herself, and it did so, causing her to miscarry, its owner does pay the value of the offspring to the husband. So in other words, the inference is as follows. It's because of the animal's bad aim or misdirected intent. Meaning, what does the Mishnah actually say? Well, it was gearing for its fellow ox and it gored the woman, and that's the reason why the animal is exempt. But if it had been aiming for the woman and gored her, and the offspring obviously miscarried, in that particular case, shall we say that this is a refutation of the opinion of Rav Ada bar Ahava? And if you remember what he said, if an ox intended to gore a woman and they caused her to miscarry, their owners are exempt from paying the value of the offspring. Okay? So in other words, what we're saying is that initially, Rav Ada bar Ahava, which we learned in the previous Mishnah, said, look, it doesn't matter. Even if the ox intended to gore her, okay, and it didn't kill her, but it killed the offspring, there would be an exemption to pay. But the Mishnah seems contrary to that. It seems that the reason that there's an exemption to pay is because it was trying to go for its fellow ox. But had it gone for her, it would have had to have paid, which seems like a direct contradiction to Rav Ada bar Ahava. So what do you think, guys? Do you think there is a contradiction or not?
Kevin, you want to go for it?
Just what is the contradiction? What is the potential contradiction? Just explain that again.
Okay,
what the contradiction
no problem.
may be.
I just wanted to check maybe if you guys were able to understand when you did Chazorah. Look, Rav Ada bar Ahava said, look, it doesn't matter what the ox's intention was, whether it intended to gore a woman and that caused her to miscarry, or it intended to gore another ox. You still, as the owner of that ox, exempt from paying the value of the loss of the offspring. That's his opinion. The Gemara says that, look, the placing of the word, that the reason the ox's owner is exempt from paying the value of the offspring intended to gore its fellow ox is that the wording of the Mishnah is as follows, as you can see from the screen, is that if an ox intended to gore its fellow ox and it struck a pregnant woman instead, her offspring miscarried, the ox's owner is exempt from paying the value of the offspring. So they want to know, is it a contradiction to Rav Ada bar Ahava? Because Rav Ada bar Ahava said it doesn't matter what the ox's intent is, whereas the Mishnah is saying, look, it was going for another ox. It missed the other ox and hit her, and therefore there's an exemption. That's what implies that therefore there's an exemption. And therefore, that's a refutation of Rav Ada bar Ahava. So we learn, because you guys obviously had quite a bit to do on Shabbos. Maybe you didn't remember. We learn that, listen, there's nothing, even though you can read that into the wording, it's actually irrelevant because the law is that even if the oxen intended to gore the woman, the owners are also exempt from paying the value of the loss of the offspring. And the reason is just that the structure of the sentence has to form in parallel. What do we mean? Is that the Mishnah mentions that an ox that intended to gore its fellow is as follows. Because in the latter clause it says if a person intended to strike his fellow, but instead struck a pregnant woman, he's liable to pay for the value of the lost offspring. Because this is how the law is stated in the scriptural verse. So that's why they're saying that if an ox intended to gore its fellow ox and instead struck a pregnant woman, its owner is exempt from paying for the value of the offspring. So let me just explain to you what I'm saying, or what the Gemara is saying. What it's saying is as follows, is that you don't have to necessarily read into the Gemara in any way. All you have to know is that at the end of the day, is that it follows, it mimics the wording, etc. Because you might have thought that if a Jew that intended to strike the woman actually struck her, that for sure he's liable for her offspring that miscarried. But we couldn't know that necessarily if his intention was to strike the other fellow in the bar fight, and she was accidentally struck because she got between her husband, being that other fellow and this fellow, and then she had a miscarriage, that he would have to pay for the value of the offspring. So that's why there's a verse in Exodus that's coming to teach you that. To say that it doesn't matter what his intention is, he has to pay either way. Obviously, if he goes for her, he has to pay either way. But where does it come into play? There's another halacha as far as the death penalty is concerned. Do you remember we learned in Sanhedrin in the 79th daf, there's a difference between Rabbi Yehuda's explanation and the rabbis and the Tanna Kamma. So the rabbis are saying that it doesn't matter. You intend to kill a Jew. It doesn't matter if you kill a different Jew. In that particular case, it's not like you miss and you intend to kill an animal and then you kill a Jew. You get the death penalty. You kill what you want to kill one Jew, you're not allowed it. It's a death penalty for that. You happen to have bad aim and kill another Jew, that death penalty still applies because your intent is to kill another Jew. But we are saying that perhaps it's not like that with regards to payments. When you intend to hit somebody and you miss, and you accidentally injure somebody else, you might think that you're not obligated for payment. Why? Let's look at the laws of Shabbat. If you accidentally broke Shabbat, you're not liable to the death penalty, you're liable for a chatas offering. So therefore we learn that any monetary damage, even if it's misdirected, in that particular case, you still owe. Only Rabbi Yehuda would turn around and say, not Rabbi Yehuda, sorry guys, Rabbi Shimon would say that if you try to attack one Jew and kill him and missed and hit another Jew and killed him, that you are off the hook for murder, but you go to the city of refuge, because remember it says he rises up against him and ambushes him, meaning his fellow. So Rabbi Shimon reads this as saying that your intent has to be for the fellow that you actually ended up killing. The rabbis say, no, you intended to kill a fellow Jew, and therefore goal achieved. It might be that your aim is bad, but anything worthy of the death penalty doesn't protect you from another death penalty. All right, so let's go on. That added a little bit of clarity there. So all we are saying is that the Gemara basically parallels it. It says here in the case of a man that tries to attack another man, he attacks a woman and jolts her pregnancy and miscarries, so too he pays. If an ox is going to attack its fellow ox and misses and attacks the woman, so too there's exemption from payment. So we learn there that whether or not the ox was going for the woman or going for another ox, there is still exemption of payment because there's not the same degree of liability, okay, for the fetus itself. Okay. Now, an exception to this Mishnah ruling is incited. Okay, is that Rav Papa said if an ox gores a pregnant Canaanite woman and like a maidservant or whatever, and her offspring were miscarried, its owner must pay the value of the offspring to the maidservant's owner. Why is that? Guys, why is that?
Because she doesn't have this, because she belongs to the owner.
Correct, and therefore, what the law is that there's exactly what Gavin said. There's no exemption. Why? If your ox, we learned if your ox damages another ox, we've always learned that your property that damages somebody else's property, you're liable for payment. Okay, because he suffered a financial loss, because that offspring could have ended up being a servant that served him, because all her heirs, the maidservant's heirs, belong to the slave master. So therefore, damaging property, the slave master pays. The owner of the ox pays the slave master. Gavin, perfect. So where do we derive this from? From there was basically a verse that stated, let me just see if I can share my screen with you. Gav, just read. The Torah states.
The Torah states, Exodus 21:22. If men shall fight and they jolt a pregnant woman and her offspring are miscarried, if there will be no fatality, the woman does not die, he, the one who struck her, shall surely be punished, as the husband of the woman shall cause to be assessed against him, and he shall give compensation by the order of the judges. Verse 30 deals with the case where the man intended for his fellow, but inadvertently struck the woman, Rashi. He is certainly liable to pay the value of the offspring if he intended to strike the woman. See Rambam, whatever, 4.1. It was explained above, end of 42a, why the verse deals with the case where he did not intend for her. And then 7, Genesis 22.5, Abraham was actually addressing himself to both his slave Eliezer and his son Ishmael, see Rashi. However, the Gemara exposition that follows applies only to Eliezer.
Okay, so what it's saying in Bereshit chapter 22, verse 5, is that we see this halacha is that at the end of the day, if she was not a free woman but a Canaanite maidservant, any damages caused to her or her offspring, you have to pay the maidservant's owner. Okay, because Scripture stated that Avram told his Canaanite slave Eliezer, "Stay here by yourselves with him, the donkey," which is interpreted to mean you basically the part of the nation. that is similar to a donkey. Just like the enslaved Canaanites are a nation that are legally akin to a donkey, meaning if you own them, that it's equivalent to property. Just as if an ox would gore a donkey and cause it to miscarry, the ox's owner would be liable to pay damages. So too, if an ox gores a Canaanite maidservant and causes her to miscarry, its owner must pay damages. And as we explained in the 42nd daf, the reason it uses that example of the man that tries to attack a man and he didn't intend to go for the woman, Kevin, is because we're saying, well, what happens if the woman died and she miscarried? Then does he get the death penalty or not if his intention wasn't for her? The rabbis say yes, according to Rabbi Shimon, no. Okay, so that was just how that went. So the Mishnah states, how does one pay the value of the offspring? They assess the woman, okay, and they determine how much she was worth before giving birth and how much she's worth after giving birth. And the depreciation is considered the value of the offspring, which the damager pays. Okay, so the Gemara wonders, you call this the value of the offspring. It should have been called the value of the offspring and the appreciation that occurred in the woman through the offspring. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Is that there's two payments that have to be made. The one of it is for the value of the offspring, and the other one is the loss of value of the woman. We're not talking about physical damages, tsar, which is pain that goes directly to her, and nezek, actual damages, goes to her and the husband. We're saying, what is this lack of appreciation in the miscarriage? So the fetus obviously has lost its value as it's stillborn, and also the woman's lost her certain value. So apparently Gemara times were different. As a woman became pregnant, she became more robust, meaning she became heavier, and men considered that much more beautiful because they considered it a sign of fertility and the fact that she was really a woman and she was fertile and worthwhile. I don't know if you've ever seen those art paintings. They always depict these women that are like 200 kilograms overweight. That's meant to be sexy. I'll tell you why.
I know.
What, Gav?
Attractive, yeah.
I thought that's just bloated. No, you're 100% right. There are other ways.
I tell you why.
That's right. Corpulent. I think that's the word, Damon, isn't it? Corpulent.
Yeah. So I tell you why that was, is that in
Black men find that as well, man.
What?
Black men also prefer bigger women.
Yeah, but
that's right.
There's a specific reason that Gavin's bringing that up. And what I was going to say is that Gavin's completely correct because, I remember because I've always had a big stomach because of my liver disorder. And when I was young, black men would turn around to me and say, "You're going to be rich one day."
Yeah.
and I said to them, "From your mouth to God's ears." So I'll tell you why. Because what happens is when you're living in a society where there's no modern food production, you see a physical difference between a gaunt woman that has been malnourished because she's on the poverty line compared to a robust woman that has eaten more than she should have from a nutritional point of view. Let's be like that. And it's a sign of wealth and health and success. Today, we know that obesity causes cholesterol problems and diabetes, etc. And therefore, our view of beauty has gone back to what is now known as trim and healthy. I think the magazines take it a little bit far because, it's like there was this cartoon in Mad Magazine where a supermodel got stuck on an island and she found a carton of cigarettes and she says, "I can live off this for a month." It was a funny article by Mad Magazine. But the point of it is, in those days, robustness was a value of fertility and her view. Also, the thing of it is people were less superficial. Today, they want somebody that's petite and small. And in those days, they were interested in a wife for breeding purposes, for genetics, for a mother, etc. So a woman held stock in a different sort of value. So the combination of both is what the assessment is worth. So the Gemara says this is indeed what the Mishnah means to say. How does one pay the value of the offspring and the appreciation that had occurred in the woman through the offspring? Why was there an appreciation? Because of her pregnancy, she looked more robust. So they assess the woman and determine how much she was worth before giving birth and how much she's worth after giving birth. And the difference is considered the value of the offspring and of the woman's appreciation through the offspring, both of which were lost through her miscarriage. And the damager pays the entire amount to the husband. Okay? So, in other words, the husband is awarded not only the lost value of the offspring themselves, but also the lost value of the robustness that his wife had gained through pregnancy. So the Mishnah obviously says how these values are assessed. But guys, this only covers damages related to pregnancy, not other damages. In other words, we assess that the woman would have been worth as a maidservant, like in the slave market, while pregnant, and what she'd be worth after the termination of pregnancy if she had miscarried without any associated injury whatsoever. Okay? So this difference reflects purely the loss of value due to miscarriage. And basically, the husband gets the amount in full. Now, we learned some time before that if she suffered personal injuries, who gets the money, guys?
The husband. No, personal injuries itself.
Okay.
They shared half, I think. Is
excellent.
it not half?
Excellent. So
she gets half as yeah.
Excellent. So how it works is for tsar, for pain. Gavin did remember correctly, but he didn't remember the category. For tsar, for pain or humiliation, that's hers entirely. Because who feels the pain? He doesn't feel the pain. Okay? But they share it if it's related to damages. It goes under nezek shalem. Actual full payment for damages to her. We're not talking about the robustness, because if you picture this, before she was pregnant, she had a certain physical worth, and during the pregnancy, she appreciated in physical beauty and value in those times, and obviously the value of the offspring. But what we're saying is, take a case where before she was pregnant, if she was injured, where it's affected her physicality, she gets the entire value of the pain. But as far as the physical injury is concerned, if it was in a concealed part of her body, she, Kevin, receives 2/3 of the money and her husband 1/3, okay? But if it was in the visible part of the body, she receives 1/3 and her husband 2/3. That's according to Rashi in Ketubot 65b. So if it's in a non-concealed place, in other words, a visible part of the body, why does the husband get more?
Because I wanted to make a point. Gavin, you want to say something?
No.
Just before you said this.
I didn't read it. No, I did read, but I didn't cover.
So can I just do a preamble to that before?
Yeah.
In one of the parshas, it discusses, I think it's from the previous books we in Devarim now. So it's one of the previous ones. The husband sort of has dominion over the wife, and he sort of owns her in a way. So that's why he gets the damages, or some of the damages. It's in one of the previous parshas. I can't remember exactly. So, and her value, her worth diminishes to him. She has a certain value to him. So if there are damages to her, that's why he is eligible for the damages. I'm just surmising.
Kevin's right. Look,
I would guess. I read it from Safari because I read earlier. I didn't cover it. But what I would say is that the reason why he gets 2/3 as well, possibly, is the fact that he stands more to lose. He loses more than she does.
In what way?
Because she's a breeder for him. He's married to 3-4 women, let's say. Each one's breeding for him. If she can't breed anymore, she's useless.
Okay, you were on the right track. You went off, but it's not a problem. It's still, I always say it's better to play the lotto and not win than not to play the lotto and somebody else to win.
100%.
So
this is exactly It looks like I'm going to lose again, but at least I tried.
No, listen, in Shemaim, you always win for playing the lotto. So listen,
100%.
what we're saying is as follows, is that men are very vain and physical creatures. All of a sudden, if his prize, good-looking wife who he parades around town looks like Shrek, okay, then obviously he's going to feel embarrassed, but he can't divorce her because in a non-Jewish society he could have. In a Jewish society, it was frowned upon for such reasons. Although the Gemara does know that men are physical creatures, and by the fact that she visibly looks depreciated in value, is that he feels pain from this. And as a result, he gets 2/3 of the payment. If the reality is it's in a non-visible part of the body, then she gets 2/3, and the husband's just going to be miserable in private and maybe not as attracted to his wife, but he only gets 1/3 of that sort of compensation, because women were often seen as status symbols, like a Ferrari or whatever. If you married a girl that was far more... Look, nothing's changed. I don't care what Woman Lib says, is that women marry men for financial security, or in their 20s for the fact that the guy's like in high school. What's it? The football star. She marries the football star in high school, right? Or like goes out with a football star in high school. And then when she's in her 30s, she goes out with a nerdy millionaire. But it's hypergamy. She wants the best she can get. And just like a millionaire will marry some stupid, vacuous, blonde woman that doesn't have a brain in her head because he's attracted to her look, and women say that's superficial. You don't think it's superficial for a woman to marry a man just because of that he's got money. It doesn't matter what quality of person he is. It means that they're both superficial. And since the wound is visible, he's embarrassed. So therefore he gets 2/3 of the compensation and she gets 1/3. And then if it's in a concealed part of her body, she gets 2/3 because she's a bit embarrassed, and he gets only 1/3, and he has to live with it. All right. So as far as that's concerned, that's pretty clear. Nothing that complicated.
Yeah, Shkach, you explained that well. Thank you. Yeah, you explained that well.
Now, there seems to be a refutation here on a particular basis, because the Gemara is saying so. How does one pay the value of the offspring? They assess the woman and determine how much she was worth before giving birth, how much she's worth after giving birth, taking miscarrying and depreciation of her body into account. And and that's what you pay. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the opposite. He says, if so, a woman increases her value after birth, after giving birth. Rather, they assess the offspring and determine how much they were worth. What does this mean, guys? What he's saying is as follows, in a nutshell, is that he's saying, look, actually, we go according to the assessment. Do you remember before we were learning in one of the previous dafs that if there was damage to a particular field, they don't take that produce and see what it was worth on the end market. Or you remember when an ox goes into and consumes produce, remember that, etc. Or they say when you're doing an assessment, you work on the lower amount. All right. What I'm saying is as follows: is that if we look at damages, Nezek Shalom, what we say is the guy is a doctor. Your ox has gored him, and now the guy can't be a plastic surgeon. And the plastic surgeon was doing breast augmentation, rhinoplasty, nose jobs, everything that paid a fortune of money. If you have to pay him back for that damage because he's now no longer can perform surgery, you're going to be broke. So what you have to do is you're going to have to take his surgical skills and see what he'd be worth working at a government hospital as a trauma surgeon, like in an emergency, on a government salary. That's what we say when we say, what is the person worth on the slave market? We say in the lesser value of what they're worth, actually. And that's how you determine what's owed in damages. Otherwise, it could make the person financially destitute who has to pay back the person injured. So it's a balance. It's a balance between making sure that the damager pays, but not pays rates at 20,000 Rand an hour for rhinoplasty of what the surgeon would have been worth. Okay, it's a balance. So what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is saying is, look, a woman isn't worth more. Maybe to her husband she's more attractive because she looks robust. But let's get real here. If she was on the market, on the slave market, she's actually worth less. Because if she's pregnant, she could, in those days, the mortality rate was very high for giving birth. Most of the time, because you didn't have vitamin K, cyclocapron, sanitized methods of delivering, you didn't have cesarean sections, many women would die in childbirth, by the way, many women. And sometimes not after their first kid. They could have many children, and then, the fifth kid could be the damaging one. But the reality is he said there's a problem because she's not worth more after she gives birth. She's not worth less after she gives birth. She's worth more. Because if you want to look at physical beauty and say she was pretty and robust while pregnant, and because of the miscarriage, she physically doesn't look as beautiful, and she's lost the offspring, he was saying, listen, there's nothing to talk about. If she was on the slave market and somebody was looking to buy her as a maidservant, it's a risky job buying this woman that's pregnant because she could end up dying during childbirth. So she's worth less. So you can forget about the fact that you can take that into the equation of what she's worth. What you have to take into account is what the offspring would have been worth. And now this is not the offspring of a healthy offspring that, say an offspring is born, Kevin, and it's a child, and that child is indentured to grow up as an adult and work for the master. That's a viable child. We don't know if she will live, and we don't know if the child will live. So you say, look, well, what is her depreciated value now that she's at life risk for somebody to buy? It's like buying a car, and at the end of the day, you don't have the car's engines being shot because people have used it for drag racing. So you could get a wonderful racing car, and you could get a dead car. So the thing of it is, it's a risk to the person buying. A person would rather buy hire an employee that doesn't go on maternity benefits or is at risk than a frail old person that could end up dying. So he said you can't take the mother's value into account, and further to which the offspring's value is reduced. Why is it reduced? Because the offspring could live or it could not. So you don't pay the full value of an offspring. We don't know if it's going to live or not. So in other words, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, you don't pay it all for the mother, not at all. And the offspring, you pay a reduced value. Okay. So rather they assess the offspring and determine how much they were worth. That's what the Gemara says. Okay. Let me just check something with you guys. Okay. So
Surely a dead offspring is worth 0 in theory.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily a dead offspring at all. Because
I agree. It's not. If it's not a dead offspring, I understand. But
yeah, correct.
Sometimes it's straight away.
Yeah, but that's absolutely correct. So what we're saying is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, if so, a woman increases in value after she gives birth. Rather, they assess the offspring and determine how much they were worth. What does Rav Shimon ben Gamliel mean to say? An explanation is presented. Rabba said, this is what he means to say. Is a woman actually more valuable before giving birth than after giving birth, as your method of assessment assumes by the Tana Kamma, by the rabbis? Why? A woman is surely more valuable after giving birth than before giving birth because she is at less risk of mortality. And further to which the fetus has got a 50-50 chance of survival. Therefore, you cannot pay for an offspring the full value. If there's any payment to be made, it's a gamble. Thus, your method of assessment will not result in any payment. What it means in any payment for the woman. Rather, they assess the value of the offspring and give the payment to the husband. Okay? So we're saying, hang on a second, but I thought we're talking about slave. We're not talking about that. The husband obviously gets the value. We're just saying that we cannot give perceived value compared to what it's valued on an objective market. I'll give you an example. Somebody's in love with a woman. Kevin's got to go now, and he thinks this woman's the 10 out of 10, and she's a 5 out of 10. The world at large would see her as a 5 out of 10, and he says her as a 10 out of 10. So we have to see value based on objective realities of how people at large would find it in value. Okay? But the money goes to the husband for the offspring. And not only to the husband, by the way, the father of the child. We learned even if they weren't married, but they halachically could have got married. All right, Kev, we got to go now. You've got to